In 1972, the Miami Dolphins became the first and only team in NFL history to go through an entire season unbeaten.
The franchise started in '66 and had 4 losing seasons, and they didn't win any more than 3 or 4 games each year. Shula came in '70, and the first season he was there in 1970, we won 10 games.
Although many consider it a tampering violation, the Dolphins traded a first-round pick to the Colts in exchange for Don Shula. This became easily the greatest decision in franchise history. In Shula's second season, Miami made it back to the playoffs. After beating the Chiefs, what at the time was the longest game in NFL history, the Dolphins routed a whopping 21-0 victory in the AFC Championship against Shula's former team, the Baltimore Colts. Sadly, the team fell short of a Super Bowl win against the Cowboys, but the team was determined to come back stronger than ever, and boy did they. The 1972 Miami Dolphins was a force to be reckoned with.
Running backs are just a joy every time I think about them. You have to start with Larry Zonka, who's as good as any fullback in professional football. Big and strong, and he's in there every play of every ball game, giving you whatever he has. His running mate, Jim Kick, certainly does what you have to do to supplement what Zonka has. He can block for Zonka when Zonka's carried a ball. These two, along with Mercury Morris, give us 3 of the fine backs in professional football. Merck is the guy that can go into the ball game and get you moving if you're not moving.
The team was propelled by an explosive offense whose plan was to jam the ball down the opponent's throat. Behind the 3-headed backfield of Larry Zonka, Jim Kick, and Mercury Morris in Miami, the Dolphins' offense was firing on all cylinders. Zonka and Morris became the first running back duo in NFL history to rush for 1,000 yards each. In 1972, the 3 backs combined for a whopping 2,638 yards. Nobody could stop the run. The offense was also led by Hall of Fame QB Bob Griese. In Week 5, the Dolphins' star quarterback goes down, and the veteran Earl Morrall, who many thought should retire before the season, stepped in. He decided not to retire because he wanted to play for Don Shula, who coached him in Baltimore. That season, Earl Morrall went a perfect 8-0 until Shula pulled him in the AFC Championship game versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. Morrall got the NFL first-team nod that season, but Griese is in the Hall of Fame. The Dolphins had so much talent that it was nearly impossible for any team to match up with them. Some of the other offensive favorites included Mad Dog Jim Mandich, Hall of Famers Larry Little, Jim Langer, and Paul Warfield.
Not only did the offense rank first in points scored, but the defense also was ranked first. Led by defensive coordinator Bill Arnsparger, many refer to the Dolphins' 1972 defense as the greatest of all time. Before Super Bowl VI, Coach Tom Landry referred to the Dolphins' defense as the no-name defense. Nobody on that defense was selfish or a household name. Anchored by Arnsparger's 3-man front, the 72 defense was one of the first NFL teams to use the 3-4 defensive scheme as opposed to the traditional 4-3 approach. Many players refer to Bill Stanfill as the heart of the defense. He brought the energy. However, the most dominant part of the defense was the secondary. Cornerbacks Tim Foley and Curtis Johnson were above-average starters, but safeties Jack Scott and Dick Anderson were game-breakers. Scott was Super Bowl MVP. He recorded 2 interceptions in the Super Bowl win. Dick Anderson was a Pro Bowler and a first-teamer. He had 5 interceptions and 3 fumble recoveries that season. In the first 2 weeks of the 1972 season, the Dolphins handled their opponents soundly, beating the Kansas City Chiefs and the Houston Oilers. In Week 3, the Dolphins were in a nail-biter against the Minnesota Vikings. This was one of the fiercest games of the season. The Dolphins were down 2 scores with under 5 minutes left to play. In some way, somehow, Miami figures out a way to win. Week 5 comes around and the Dolphins are in the zone. Their franchise quarterback, Bob Griese, goes down. Miami is forced to turn to wily veteran Earl Morrall. Having played quarterback for Don Shula in Baltimore, Morrall was no stranger to his system and style of play. In Week 6, the Dolphins were leading the Bills the entire game until they led a resurgence. The Dolphins were able to hold off the Bills for a 24-23 victory. In Week 7, the Dolphins squared off against Shula's former team and held them to a shutout. In Week 8, the Bills proved that Week 6 was no fluke. The Dolphins routed them easily. In Week 9, the Dolphins embarrassed the Patriots 52-0. In Week 10, the Dolphins were faced off against the New York Jets. The Dolphins found themselves trailing in the fourth quarter 20-17, but a 14-yard touchdown run by Mercury Morris gave the Dolphins a 24-20 victory. From weeks 11 to 13, the Dolphins soundly beat the Cardinals, Patriots, and Giants. In the final week of the regular season, the Dolphins once again dominated and shut out the Baltimore Colts. In the divisional round of the playoffs, the Dolphins played the Cleveland Browns. The Dolphins were in dire need of a big play when special teams ace Charlie Babb blocked Cleveland's punt. Miami was able to scoop the ball and score. The Dolphins went on to win the game 20-14. The AFC Championship game versus the Pittsburgh Steelers was one for the books. With the Dolphins' offense going nearly stagnant, Shula decides to pull the plug on Morrill and put Greasy back in the game. This was a controversial call, but Shula has won more games in NFL history than any other coach. The most defining play of the game was Larry Seipel's fake punt. Shula gave Seipel the green light to do the fake whenever he wanted, and Seipel took advantage. Miami might not have won without it.
The single receiver for the Steelers. 10 men poised up front. Snap of the football. And here's Seipel running with it, coming forward over the 50, the 45, the 40, the 35, the Pittsburgh 30, the 25, the 20 to the sideline, and out of bounds at the Pittsburgh 12-yard line.
The Dolphins were now back in the Super Bowl, and they were ready to set the tone. The Dolphins dominated the Super Bowl from the first snap. They had 2 touchdowns called back, or else they would have been up 28-0. Garrow's kick was blocked. He picked up the ball, it was intercepted, and returned for a touchdown late in the fourth quarter. It was a classic case of trying to do too much. The final score ended up being 14-7 in a game that should not have been that close.
Let me tell you something. The only thing I miss about football is about 5 seconds. 5 seconds in a huddle, right before you break the huddle and go up to the line of scrimmage. When you have 5 of the best offensive linemen that are in tune with you, Wayne Moore, Bob Kuechenberg, Jim Langer, Larry Little, and Norm Evans. And I'm looking across at them. This is the game where we're going 17-0. We're putting the final emphasis on a perfect season. Each one of them is looking at me going, run behind me. They're mouthing the words. They're not over. They can't talk in huddle because greasy. They're all pointing to themselves going, anything happens, drift to me. And Bob Kuechenberg grabs me by the face mask and says, you better stick your helmet up my ass on this play because we're going in the end zone. When you have people that intent on victory, you got to just marvel. If I could go back for anything, I'd like to go back in a time machine just to live those 5 seconds and looking in the eyes of those men, because that was the most confidence I've ever felt in my life about anything.
In Super Bowl VII, Larry Zonka ran for 112 yards as the NFL's #1 ranked offense took a 14-0 lead. Miami then focused its #1 ranked defense on NFC rushing champion Larry Brown.
Again.
Why'd we play so well? Don't know. Maybe we were that good. For a bunch of no-names, we did okay.
Manny Fernandez led the Dolphins with 17 tackles, but safety Jake Scott, who intercepted 2 passes, was named the game's MVP. The Dolphins had dominated Washington. Now they were dueling with destiny.
45 seconds to go.
This can be the last play of the game. This could be it. This is it. Come on, stop him this time. Let the clock run out.
4th down. Here is Kilmer back to throw. He is caught, and he is dropped back at the 17-yard line.
That's it. It's over. There you go, Nicky. That's right, man.
Don Shula, he had lost twice before in the Super Bowl, and now he watches the clock tick away as Shula has won his Super Bowl.
This is my 3rd time around, and I haven't done too well in my first 2 Super Bowls, as a lot of people keep reminding me.
It's been nothing but really frustration. Although we've won a lot of football games and I've been named Coach of the Year, there was always that empty feeling of not really having accomplished the ultimate. And this right here is the ultimate.
The win marked a perfect 17-0 season. Teams like the Patriots, Bears, Saints, and Colts have gotten close, but no team other than the '72 Dolphins have been able to complete the perfect season.